After about a year, I had to branch out on my own, and I started working the Rockwell Gardens project, and there was a priest from Precious Blood Church, which was the next one over, and he would walk with me once or twice a week. And we would walk through all the buildings, and in the housing projects, each building was controlled by a gang, and then gangs would have a cluster of buildings, and we'd walk through each of the buildings, make contact with gang members, and then we'd cross gang territories, and we would be seen. One day, I showed up, and nobody could walk with me, so I had to walk by myself, and we knew there was some trouble. There was a couple of buildings that there was some tension by, and so I had to go there by myself. And as I walked, and I got to the one building, it was at 2501 West Monroe, on the west side. There was a lot of tension. Guys were running around, guys were carrying guns, people who would tolerate me didn't want to see me. And I could feel the tension and the danger. And it was back before there was cell phones, so there was no way I could contact Brother Bill. And so I had to be there by myself. And as I was standing there, I realized that if I leave now, I will never come back. Because this is what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to be where gang trouble and when there's troubles. So I would stand there, and I stood there on the corner of Campbell and Monroe, and I felt totally alone. And while I was there was this one car that would circle the building, and they had the two toughest looking gang members that you'd ever want to see. And the one guy on the passenger side would just stare me down every time he drove by. So I stood there for, a couple hours. And then I noticed that the atmosphere seemed to change. The tensions seemed to go away, that things were different. And I started thinking, well, I wonder what's going on at the other building. So I was at a five-story building, and I decided that I was going to walk over to the disciple building that was where the tension was. And as I started walking in that direction, a car door opened, and the guy who'd been circling me got out of the car, and he looked at me. And he walked up to me, and he started talking with me. And then when we finished talking, we went to shake hands. And one of the things that's interesting is gang members treat everybody differently. So Brother Bill, they would always teach him the gang handshakes and stuff like that, but they'd never teach me the gang handshakes. So as I'm leaving, this guy's teaching me this gang handshake, and then he finishes up. He goes like this, and this is like a pitchfork, and a pitchfork is a disciple symbol. And I pulled my hand back, and I said, "Well, that's a disciple symbol." And he said, "Well, it is, but when you point it down, it's a sign of disrespect." And I said, "Oh, well, I can't do that part of the handshake because I got friends who are disciples." And so I walked around to the disciple building, and it was just calm. There was nothing there, and I felt, wow, I am really exhausted. So I went home. The next day, since the tension was there, I had to go back, and I had to go back by myself. And for whatever reason, I could not get a hold of Brother Bill. And so I parked my car over Precious Blood. I walked through the neighborhood. I got to the point where I was the night before. And when I was there, 3 different gang members came up to me and said, "Brother Jim, I do a lot of bad things, but every night I pray to God that I will be forgiven." And then I prayed with him. And after I'd finished praying with him, one of the guys came up to me and said, "The tension that we had, or the problem that we had last night, has gone from the Rockwell Gardens projects over to the Henry Horner projects." And so he was basically telling me, if you wanted the trouble's over there now, and that's where you should go. So I went back over to St. Malachy's, and as soon as I walked into St. Malachy's, in walked Brother Bill, and I started telling him about the story. So Bill and I decided to walk to the Henry Horner projects, and when we walked through the disciple area of the Henry Horners, you could feel the tension. And then we crossed in the area of the vice lord, you could feel even more tension. And nobody was out, and everybody was in the buildings, and there was this one building where there was a guy standing there. And he was, a lot of times when guys are in prison, they bulk up by lifting weights. And he looked like he'd just gotten out of prison. He was big and strong. And so, being me and Brother Bill, that's who we walked towards. So we started walking towards him, and as we got about 15 feet from the building, he bounded down the steps, walked up to me and said, "You were in Rockwell Gardens last night, weren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I was." He shook my hand, and he did that gang handshake, which Brother Bill didn't know. And I realized that, and as soon as we did that, everybody started coming out of the building. The tension seemed to break, and whatever happened between the vice lords and disciples found peace at that point. And when we went back through, the whole neighborhood seemed to change. It was my moment of truth. And from that, grace came. And I found that scripture, that love casts out fear, that God is love, that has been the essence of my spirituality, of how I deal with gang members, and what I've been doing for 30 years. You had a question back there a while ago. See, one of the problems that we have in our city, in Chicago, is we haven't dealt with poverty very well. Back when the huge housing projects were up, it fostered gangs. And so when they started to tear down the buildings, the murder rate dropped. And now it's going back up because the problems that people have are not being addressed. And the housing problem that we have among our poor in Chicago right now, it is absolutely awful. The people who, young people, they start having families, they have nowhere to go. They can't get their own place because they don't have any income. And so they're living with their parents or their sisters, and you have multiple families living in apartments. And when you have multiple families living in apartments, the apartments become run down. Things don't get fixed. There's lots of stress. Kids are dropping out of school before 8th grade. I was a couple years ago. I was helping a school, and the school was fighting to stay open, and they decided to keep it open. So I went to the 8th grade graduation. I was invited to go to the 8th grade graduation. And when I went, I got there early, and they had the kindergarten graduation. And so you got kids all in caps and gowns, and there must have been like 60 kids. And the principal gets up and he says, "We had a good year, but our average attendance rate is 80%. So every day, 1 out of 5 kids is not in school." And he says, in order for these kids to to benefit from their education, they have to come to school. And so he talks about that, and then everybody shakes hands and leave. And so all the kindergartners go out, and the 8th graders come in. 15 kids graduating from 8th grade. 16 kindergarten, 15 in 8th grade. Now, I'm going to say that some of the kids whose parents are looking for a better school got them into better schools. But I'm going to say in that neighborhood, half the kids are not graduating from 8th grade. There are schools, districts all through the city, the kids are not graduating from 8th grade. So what are they doing? They're hanging out. When they hang out, they sell drugs. When they sell drugs, they have to have a gun. When they have a gun and they get in a dispute, they use it. And so the murder rate is going up, and it's not getting any better. And again, and also the people that I work with and deal with, unchurched. Lots of churches around. A lot of times we hear ministers talking about the neighborhoods. But the people they're talking about, people who are doing the shootings and stuff, they're not going to church. So there's a disconnect between the churches, and the poor.
Do you ever go into their homes?
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
And what do you find? Split up families or?
Split up families. Well, when teenagers are having kids, the parents aren't going to stay together. And you find also, it's interesting that a lot of the girls, they try to get pregnant because in some ways that's keeping that guy in their life forever. And so if they got kids by different guys, then they've got more than one guy that they're keeping a relationship with. Families are moving in, so you have three families living in a 3-bedroom apartment. So each family's in a room. Lots of people are sleeping on couches. The beds aren't the best. Furniture's not very good. The families don't eat together. They don't cook meals and eat together regularly. Lots of kids they go to school to eat, so they eat breakfast at school, they eat lunch at school. So the parents aren't really providing their food and sustenance, and they're not sitting down and talking around a table. So there's family. And the family, and the generosity of the poor, they will look at somebody and they'll say, if you're going to be homeless, I can't let you do that, you can move in.
Brother Jim, here's the point to me, is that you are putting yourself on the line, like Christ, who will minister to these people. You're putting yourself on the line. That's your ministry. And when I talk to you, I can hear the peace inside of yourself. That trust in God is I don't want to make it more than what it is. I want to learn more about it. So can you go back to that time when you were, you knew if you didn't come back, you'd never come back. And do you keep getting challenged interiorly about that? Or have you, is it okay?
I've been challenged a number of times, and I get challenged all the time. Now for me, what I found was that when I became afraid, that I was supposed to love. And when I would love, then grace would happen. What I'm saying to you that is if you followed my spirituality, you would go in the world and you would love. You would love your coworkers, even the ones who are hard to work with. You would trust in God that by doing what you're supposed to do and by loving that God, you're witnessing, you're light in the world. Forgive everyone everything. In all our years, we have never broken a relationship. And then when there's fear, we love, and love casts out fear. And so I've been doing this. I've been doing this for 30 years. Boundaries have to be established. It's not, it's not like. And again, when you're a servant of the poor, they will treat you as a servant. And it's not always fun. You get disrespected sometimes, but you still love, and grace happens.